This is the Red Podcast.
This is episode number 53. We're talking more about book business models. It's part 2 of a 2-part series. And if you're thinking about writing a book or you've already got a book, we're going to show you how to make money with it. Different ways than you might have thought of before. That's coming up on this episode of the Red Podcast.
This is the Red Podcast. Real entrepreneur development. Make more money. Work less and live a life of freedom. No BS advice that really works. Here's your hosts, David Hooper and Laurel Staples.
David, I was reading the most recent copy of Entrepreneur Magazine. I don't think you've gotten to this issue yet, but there was an article about a girl who had started a company called Get Around, which is a peer-to-peer car sharing company. I'd never heard of this before. Have you heard of something like that?
I've heard of the concept, yes. It's kind of like Airbnb is for housing.
Exactly. So if you have a car, which a lot of people do in the United States, you probably don't use your car for a large percentage of the day. You go to work, you park it there for 8 hours a day, you're at home, it just sits there. So you as an individual have the opportunity to rent your car to strangers who need to use it. With that in mind, David, would you rent your car out to somebody?
No, I would not. But strangely enough, on that topic, I think when my car finally dies, I'm not going to get another car. I'm just going to ride Lyft. Anytime I need a ride, pop on the Lyft app, hit the button, let them take me somewhere.
Explain what Lyft is.
Lyft is very similar to a taxi, but it's private cars. It's people just driving around, waiting to pick you up, waiting to take you somewhere, and then you give them money based on that.
It's an app-based taxi, basically. You request someone to come pick you up.
It's very, very cool. You get on the app, and we'll link all this from redpodcast.com/53. And there are a few of these. It's very similar to Uber. That's another big one. But you get on the app, you press the button. I've literally done it in our neighborhood because we're so close to downtown. We're in a hot neighborhood. I've literally pressed the button, set the alarm of the house, walked out to the front yard, and there's a car there waiting for me.
So if you're so eager to use Lyft, you could just use that and then I'll rent out your car and I'll just make us some extra income. It said that individuals can make between about $500 and $1,000 per month. That's not bad for renting your car, which you're not using most of the time.
It's not bad, but you do have to consider wear and tear on the car, and that would, I guess, help me to be 100% Lyft more quickly.
That is true.
So we're talking about books today. This is part 2 of a 2-part series. We're talking about actually not just books, but book business models. This is the Red Podcast. Red stands for Real Entrepreneur Development. We are for authors. We are for writers. We're for people with a message. If you've got a podcast, we're for you. If you've got an idea that you want to spread, we can help you do it. And the issue is, people think there's no money in books. And sometimes there is no money.
I think people have unrealistic expectations when they write a book about how many copies of that book are going to sell. And as we discussed in the last episode, typically for a business book, you don't sell more than 5,000 copies of that book. So you need to have other things in place that are going to make you money other than just the book itself.
Absolutely. The last episode, redpodcast.com/52. If you want to check that out, we went over the first 3 business models to make money with your book. We're going to talk about an additional 3 on this episode. The first one, Laurel, this is worth saying, is some people, they don't want to make 100% of their money from a book. They just look at it as supplementary income. But the purpose of the book is to give them expert status, and that expert status gives them more money. For example, if you're a teacher, if you're a freelancer, you're working with somebody right now, has some New York Times best-selling books that he's done. That is expert status. He's still working as a freelancer and as an editor, but because of these other books that he's done, he can charge a little bit more. It's also a great way to get you on television and radio. You know this and how important this can be when you were running your retail store. When you owned that, television media was really, really important, and a book is a great way to get in there.
Free media coverage is definitely a big plus of having a book because the media is looking for something interesting to talk about. They're looking for experts. They're looking for people who know a certain subject really well, and a book indicates that you know that subject really well. So if you just have a business, you're not as likely to get that free media coverage than if you have a book and a business. So it can be a really great opportunity for you to get on television, get on radio, even in newspapers, magazines, things like that.
There's a reason we have the saying, he wrote the book on blank, because a book does add a lot of credibility. When you think about getting on any kind of talk show, if you turn on CNN, Fox, MSNBC, the people you see on there are celebrities, movie stars, they've killed somebody, they've had somebody kidnapped, politicians, book authors. It's right up there with the people that we expect to see TV. And if you've got a book, that's your key to getting on TV. And you mentioned it too, Laurel. Not only just that, radio, newspapers, any other kind of media as well.
David, I know you have several books in the marketplace. How do you feel like that's affected you in terms of expert status or supplementary income?
One of the great things about it is because your book is more or less your life story, your life's work. People already know who you are before they come to you, so they know what they're getting. It makes the sales part easier, but because they're putting you on the same level as the politicians, as the people that they see on television, they're willing to pay you a whole lot more. So that's how it's helped me. It's just allowed me to raise my prices. I'm pretty much doing the same thing that I did before, except I've got 200 pages with all my information in there. And it's kind of funny how that works. It's like you see these musicians, they're really great musicians. Nobody's at the gig, but then once they have one song on the radio, then they can start getting more money, they can start getting bigger gigs and having more people there. It works the same way for business. There's not a whole lot of difference between a guy who's got a book and a guy who doesn't have a book, except for the fact that he spent 6 months, maybe a year, like in your case, Laurel, to put all those thoughts down on paper and give somebody an introduction to him, makes them more comfortable, they're willing to spend more money, they're willing to say yes easier, and it just makes the whole process easier. That's how I've used it.
I kind of think of it like if you're applying for a job and there's one applicant who has an MBA and there's one applicant who doesn't have an MBA. They might both be equally qualified for the job, but the guy who has the MBA is going to get paid more. And so if you have that book, you have the equivalent of the MBA. You might just be as qualified as the next guy, but you're going to get paid more.
It's also something that you can leverage to other media opportunities. I've been on the radio with a syndicated show for the last 10 years. How did I do it? It wasn't through my radio experience. I didn't have a lot of experience at the time, but I did walk in there with a book and some expert status that allowed me to jump to the next level. And if I wanted to take it to another level, the radio will allow me to do that. So you can stair-step these things, and I think a book, because it only takes essentially one person to do it. You've got editors and some other people involved, but it's not like a film. It's not like a television show. It's not like a radio show. Essentially, it's just one person. I think it's a very, very good first step for anybody who's looking to increase their credibility in their industry.
Also, a book can do the selling for you. I know a lot of small business owners who are kind of intimidated by the sales process and selling their product or service. But if you have a book, it gives you that expert status that almost sells for you. Dan Kennedy, before you get to ever speak with him on the phone or enroll in some of his different programs, he sends you one of his books in the mail, and you read that book and you decide pretty much then and there, okay, yes, I want to work with Dan Kennedy and take the next step. And you can do that too. You're not going to be Dan Kennedy or on that level, but you can send out your book and somebody can make the choice about whether you can help them through reading the book, which makes your selling process a whole lot easier because you've pre-sold to your customer or to your client, which is extremely helpful.
It's also a great way to weed clients out. We're all sick of those guys that just are knocking on our door. I want to work with you. I want to work with you. I want to work with you. You can say, have you read my book yet? Well, no, I haven't gotten around to it. Well, that tells you something about that person, doesn't it? If they really wanted to work with you that badly, they probably would have read your book.
I think that's great because we're all trying to avoid the client zillas, people who are just a pain to work with. So it does help weed people out. And as a coach, that's an amazingly helpful tool to have to get people just off your books before they even come into your practice. Have you read my book? No, sorry. You got to read it to get in here.
Yeah, make them jump through some hoops. The more hoops they jump through, the more likely they are to spend more money with you. They're already invested. And not only the more likely are they to spend more money with you, the more likely they are to spend higher amounts of money with you.
Absolutely. And they're not going to waste your time, and you're not going to waste their time. It's just kind of a win-win situation.
Something that we don't see a lot for nonfiction books, although it does happen, and it's worth us mentioning when it comes to book business models, film and television options. The way John Grisham got the big house that I was talking about on redpodcast.com/52, the last episode, the first part of this series. The way he did it wasn't through books as much as it was through his movies. Laurel, remember MASH? It was really, really big in the 70s and 80s, miniseries, very, very popular. You remember that? The three doctors going to Korea?
Never saw it. I was very little.
Laurel was about 3 years old then.
I know, but I can envision the logo.
But you've heard of it.
Absolutely.
It was a novel.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It was a novel. It got optioned for television. People are familiar with the story Orange is the New Black from the Netflix series. That was a book. So the real money is made when you go to television, when you go to film. Is that going to happen to your nonfiction book? Probably not. But because this is an episode about book business models, it's worth mentioning. It does happen from time to time. A lot of times how this happens in the nonfiction world isn't necessarily like the MASHes of the world or the big films, but it comes from maybe a DVD series, and it comes from something that you can sell either directly to people or that you would sell via maybe a store like Walmart, and you'll see a series like exercise series. The content that you have in your nonfiction book can be done another way. Training videos, direct to DVD, direct to video, something that you would pick up maybe at a Walmart or direct mail perhaps.
I kind of think of The Secret, that book. I know it went the other way around. They started out with a documentary and then they made the book, but those went hand in hand together to really rocket that book to success.
Well, that's a perfect example. Yeah, because if you look at the book, The Secret, it was more or less a transcription of the film. So it does work in the opposite way. You're exactly right.
So you can go either way. David, do you have any other examples of nonfiction books that were turned into films, documentaries, or TV options?
Well, you mentioned The Secret. I think that's a great place to start. A lot of the Hay House stuff has had that happen. Any Bible stories that have done that. We see this happening all the time, specifically in the new age, in the training markets, any kind of computer type training, guitar type training, musical instrument type training, dummies books. We see a lot of that kind of stuff happening there. So I would suggest if you want to see a ton of them, go to some of the new age stores. Go look at Hay House and see what they've done with home video and also books.
I've also seen authors on the Oprah channel that do some series on there. We don't watch cable TV, David, but I've seen on their websites a little picture of them with Oprah, and they have some TV option with Oprah on her channel. So that's another route as well. You don't have to do your own show or have your own book transcribed into a TV show, but it gives you the option to be an expert on a different show.
I think this brings up a general point, not just in the book business model topic, but just in general. You can repurpose any kind of content. We've got a podcast right here. We could transcribe this. We could make it a blog post. We could take the blog post, turn it into a book. We could take the book, and then we could make a home video about it that we could sell directly to people. Any kind of content that you've got, you can release it in multiple mediums. And that happens all the time. So it's just something to think about. It doesn't have to be static, where TV is TV and film is film and book is book. There's a blend, and you can blend it in any kind of combination that you want.
I'd be kind of scared if we made a home video, David.
When I say home video, let me be very, very clear. This is a video piece of content that you sell directly to people that they play in their homes. It's not something for the theater. It's not something for cable television or any kind of pay-per-view. It's just a direct-to-home video.
Thank you for clarifying.
Most home videos don't have great transcripts.
Very true.
The final business model that we're going to talk about, and this kind of relates to the film and TV options that you have, there's a blending, as I mentioned, and this is part of that blend, licensing. Sometimes the name and a character within a book can be worth more than a book. For example, Harry Potter, there's a Harry Potter amusement park. It's part of Disney. How much is that worth? Well, could be worth more than the book. There's certainly film and television options. There are figurines. There's all things Harry Potter, all sorts of toys, all sorts of calendars, all sorts of t-shirts and clothing. Sometimes this stuff can be worth more than the book itself. Granted, that's a fiction book, so let me give you a non-fiction example. Chicken Soup for the Soul. Have you read it?
No.
There's something like 200 of these things.
I think I've read part of it. I just wanted to say no.
Nobody wants to admit it, but if you look at the charts, the book charts, and you look at the holiday items, Chicken Soup always has several books on there. There are tons of them. There's Chicken Soup for the American Idol Soul, Chicken Soup for the Nashville Soul, Chicken Soup for the NASCAR Soul. Whatever it is that you're involved with, there's a Chicken Soup for you. But what you might not know is they have licensed this name. There's a Chicken Soup for the Soul dog food. Sometimes dogs need a little bit of chicken soup themselves. There is a radio show called Chicken Soup for the Soul. That name means a lot. So there's all sorts of merchandise that they have licensed that name, licensed the logo to. And you can do this with nonfiction material. I don't know if they planned that out, but it's a great example if you're looking to move away from books and increase your income, not just with book sales, but with other things.
Well, I don't think there's any chicken soup for the soul that would be good for you, David, because you're a vegetarian. You need like tofu soup for the soul.
We'll have to find that out. Is there chicken soup for the vegetarian soul?
Chicken Soup for the Soul, that's a big book. That might be kind of an anomaly there. It's a great example, but a different example is, for instance, if you're a dentist and you write a book on dentistry, you can license that book to other dentists and they can put their own name on it as a lead generation for their business. So you might license that book in different states or different areas, no one that would overlap with what you do. And then that dentist could give it out with their name, and maybe they wrote the intro or something like that, give it out to their patients and help their business. So that's another opportunity as well. If your book isn't as big as Chicken Soup for the Soul, but you still want to look into licensing your content.
On the last episode, redpodcast.com/52, we talked about the first 3 business models when it comes to building a book business. We talked about bulk sales. And Laurel, when you're licensing that content, bulk sales go hand in hand with that. And there's a lot of ways to do it. Sometimes your name is going to remain on it. Sometimes you'll have the other dentist as an author. You can let him do the forward, maybe to give him that expert status. You see a lot of these licensing deals. Here in Nashville, the buckle of the Bible Belt, there are all sorts of church books that you'll sometimes see brought to you by, and then they'll put the name of the local church on the cover. So it works for dentistry, it works for education, it works for church and religious institutions. The sky's the limit when it comes to licensing. It doesn't have to be as big as Chicken Soup for the Soul or Harry Potter or Back to the Future or Star Wars or the big licensees that we've seen over the years. I think the big takeaway when it comes to licensing is you never know what you've got until these opportunities present themselves. Sometimes you think you've got a great story, but it may be the character within the story that people are interested in. Sometimes you think that you've got a great book. Sometimes it's going to be a better movie, and that's a licensing deal. Sometimes it's one of those things. I think about Atlas Shrugged, the huge Ayn Rand book, and there are a lot of Atlas Shrugged pieces of merchandise. I know a lot of people, they've never read the book because the book is like 12,000 pages. Have you ever read it, Laurel? Atlas Shrugged?
No.
There's a reason for that because it's huge. It's like 5 books put together, and it is a very tough read, in my opinion. But you see a lot of guys, they love the T-shirts that talk about Atlas Shrugged. There is an Atlas Shrugged newsletter, and it's worth saying that that was made into a series of movies, not just once, but a couple of times.
David, let's sum up what we've talked about today, because we went over 3 points and talked about them in depth. Just sum it up for us right now.
So the first one for this episode, we talked about supplementary income with the purpose of giving you an expert status. This is going to get you on television. It's going to get you on radio. It's going to get you free media coverage. It's going to get you a higher paid teaching gig, perhaps, higher paid freelance work. Secondly, we talked about film and television options. Your story can be turned into a screenplay. Sometimes, as Laurel mentioned, you can do it just the opposite way. If you've got a video, you can turn that into a book. What we're really talking about is not going from book to film and to TV, but we're talking about repurposing your content, and that is absolutely a great business model that you can use if you do have a book. Third, licensing. Sometimes the name, the characters, the story, the logo, the title, that's going to be worth more than the book itself. And of course, this is only half of what we talked about when it comes to book business models. If you go to redpodcast.com/52, episode number 52 gives you 3 more business models. Laurel and I are happy to discuss these with you. If you want to run something by us, if you've got questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. You can do that at redpodcast.com.
And if you like this episode of Red Podcast, please go to redpodcast.com. You can click on our iTunes link or Stitcher link and leave us a review in the platform that you like to listen to this show on.
Thanks for listening. Be in touch, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Red Podcast.
You've been listening to Red Podcast, Real Entrepreneur Development. Subscribe today using iTunes, Stitcher, or via RSS at redpodcast.com.